I am Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup Studios here in Omaha, Nebraska, as well as the offices in Sydney, Australia. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on January 9th, 2018. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup's experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insight, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions during the program, we do have a chat room. It's available for you right below the main video window down there. Just bottom left-hand corner, log in, choose the guest account, put your name in, and then join us. We'd love to have your questions during the program. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions for your organization, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, or use the contact form right there on the live page. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. Lots of improvements over there at the Gallup Strengths Center. Just GallupStrengthsCenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video and downloadable audio. We call that podcast. That's available for you right on our coach's blog. All the links that you need to get it downloaded to your phone or your mobile device are available at coaching.gallup.com. Claire DeCarteret is our host today. She works as a regional director and learning solutions consultant with Gallup out of our Sydney, Australia office. Claire, I wish I was there because it's cold, cold here and warm there. Welcome to A Call to Coach.
Thank you very much. It is very warm here at the moment. So
don't rub it in.
I know. We won't. But I'm sure it's even warmer where you are, Nicole. So would love to introduce our guest today. So we are joined by Nicole Feledy today. And many of you might know Nick. She's a very active and generous member of the Strengths community. Nicole is joining us from the Gold Coast. So hi, Nicole.
Hi, Claire. Hi, Jim. Yes, I'm joining you from the sunny Gold Coast. It's beautiful weather. I'm looking out onto blue skies, fluffy clouds. The river's just floating by. It's beautiful.
I told you not to rub it in.
And that just makes us want to do it even more. Thank you very much for joining us today, Nick. The last couple of webcasts that we've done here as the Australasia edition, we've really focused on a corporate setting and really wanted to bring you in because I know what you're doing is a little bit different. So Nicole Feledy works as a learning and development consultant, predominantly in the education and personal settings. And I've been following you for a while, Nick, on Facebook, and I love your live Facebook posts that you put out there. And I always find myself really compelled to want to find out more. So a great reason to have you in here as we're all contemplating how we kick off 2018 and how we think about designing our own personal and professional goals. I think talking to you about the work that you're doing is really going to help. So welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be chatting. And I think, as you say, at the beginning of the year, when we are looking at what's going to be our story, what life are we going to want to create for ourselves, it's a really good time to be thinking about these sorts of things. And it's also the time when parents are at home with their children and they know that Christmas is over, we've got school looming. Some people will be going into a new, like year 6s will be going into year 7. You've got students who've been in year 10 going into 11. You've got 11s all facing the HSC next year. So it's just a really good time to think about, okay, what are we going to do for the rest of the year?
Absolutely. And even us as business coaches and leaders, we've really got an opportunity to reflect. And so I love your concept of mindful strengths-based narrative, which I'm eager to get into. But I wanted to, given that we need to tell the story and the name of your business is This My Story, I'd love you just to start by introducing yourself to us. Tell us about what you do and perhaps for the viewers, let everyone know what your top 5 is.
Okay, so my name is Nicole Feledy. My business I run under is This My Story, which really is about helping people understand the strategies and tactics that they can use to be the author of their own story rather than a character in somebody else's. And we can talk a little bit about that as we go on. But my top 5 is number 1, strategic, number 2, connectedness, number 3, learner, number 4, intellection, number 5, input, and then I like to put 6 and 7 in there. So number 6, positivity, and number 7, empathy. So essentially what you'll notice there is that I'm predominantly a strategic thinker and a relationship builder. And it's funny as I look back and see, even when I first wrote my book, Is This My Story?, which I wrote about 5 years ago now, I talk about a learning path, and I talk about being able to follow a particular path and connecting to a wider system. I talk about your book within a larger library of life. So even before I understood the essence of StrengthsFinder, I was living it. So that's why when I discovered StrengthsFinder, it was like finding the missing key. It's just, I can't express to everybody out there what a momentous occasion it was for me to discover a tool that would provide a person with their predominant patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. It was just there, so it was wonderful.
I would love to hear about your story. And so how did you find StrengthsFinder? What was the background to all of that? Give us the chapter 1.
Yeah, chapter 1. Chapter 1 was a school teacher. So school teacher teaching English, loved what I did, but as an English teacher, I was more interested in how stories can become metaphors for life than their particular literary merit. Yes, if I had students who were interested in literature, we would go there, but predominantly we were looking at language and communication. And what I started to realise was the power. I started doing meditation myself, and I realised the power of meditation. So I started off English teaching, then was introduced to meditation myself, and I started bringing meditation into my classes and understood the power of meditation and the paradox that it can help a person feel relaxed in self, and had massive impact on my teaching and the way students were able to concentrate in class. So I had the narrative and the mindfulness, and then what I wanted to do was expand it beyond my own classroom. So I took all the strategies and tactics I was using, and I wrote a book. So this was in about 2012. So I wrote a book, and then from there I thought a book wasn't enough. I wanted to go out into private practice. So I left the classroom full time, still kept, and I still to this day still do casual teaching because it keeps my hand in. And then I went out and working with individuals, businesses, and teachers. So working with individual teachers and students, working with their parents, working with businesses in the area of mindfulness and narrative. I'd also worked in positive psychology, because positive psychology is quite big in Australian schools. But then in 2015, I met the lovely Linda Leonard, who's as people will know, also a very experienced educator and strengths coach. She introduced me to StrengthsFinder, and that just opened my world. So from there, I sliced the StrengthsFinder into my mindfulness and narrative, and started working with schools and with teachers, and really expanding how a person can understand their natural patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior to move forward in life. Because it's not just about understanding self. That's great. Self-awareness is fantastic. But if it stops there, it's like reading the first chapter of a book and then not actually doing anything with it. So
nice.
That's the sort of nutshell of everything.
I love it, Nick. Thank you. And I can see Jim's actually put your image of how this framework comes together. I'd love you to talk us through the framework of a mindful strengths-based narrative. What does it really mean? How do these things come together? Because I feel like we're all searching for more mindfulness. We're all searching for more purpose in our behaviors and our choices. So how does this framework play into what you do?
Okay, so if we start, and people who are listening are probably familiar with StrengthsFinder, so if we start with the StrengthsFinder circle, and what we're getting from StrengthsFinder is our own natural patterns of thought, emotion, and behaviour. And really, really useful to identify those. And as Gallup teaches us, we need to add knowledge and skills in order to have our talents become strengths. So how do we do that? So we talk about that's what we need to do, but how do we do it? First thing we've got to be aware of is how those strengths, how those talents are actually playing. So that's where the mindfulness comes in. What mindfulness helps us do is be alert to what is happening with us at any one moment of time. So people can often be confused with mindfulness. It's not necessarily where the strength of your mind comes, isn't just from having not thinking. Mindfulness isn't about not thinking. Where you build your pattern is every time you notice your thought, every time you notice a thought coming in or an emotion coming in, you recognize it and then let it go. And it's that physical recognizing and letting go that helps you build the muscle of recognizing when a thought or when an emotion is coming in and letting it go. So, of course, as you practice mindfulness, you are practicing recognizing your patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. When you recognize how your thought, emotion, behavior is going, it's going to help you strengthen your talent. Because in order to strengthen a talent, we need practice. Yeah. So the mindfulness is giving you the practice. Then when you come over to the narrative side is recognizing your self-talk. So we all have this voice inside our head that is continually chatting away. And we need ways to recognize what is my true voice, what is my voice, and which is voices that have come in from society. And in order to understand that, we're going to use our mindfulness. We're also going to use our strengths, because our strengths let us know what our needs and motivations are, or what are generally needs and motivations according to our strengths. So with narrative, we also have techniques like symbolism and metaphor. We have things like foreshadowing. So when you understand the techniques of a story, and when you understand the structure of a story. So a basic story is we have an orientation, we have an initiating event, then we have a complication, then we have a resolution. And what you find is that your mind tends to work in that way. The best part about that is that there's always a resolution. Once you identify the complication, you know that there's going to be a resolution and you know you can get your way through. The other part of narrative, which I often talk about, is hero's journey, which I won't go in now because it's a bit long. But the other part of the main interesting part about hero's journey is that there's always a sidekick. There's always someone there along the journey with you, and there's always a wise person. And so one thing in life that's very interesting to look at is, who are my friends? Who are the people with me on this journey? And who is my wise person? And often that wise person can also be the voice inside yourself. And the sidekick, the friend, can also be yourself. So when you put all of them together, they actually all, and as you'll see in that particular diagram, it's about living this mindful, strength-based narrative where you're the author of your own life, because you can recognize the patterns. So I hope that explained it.
Thank you. So this seems like something that we could all really use, especially the combination of all three of these, and just that maturity of understanding ourselves and our motivations through our strengths, through the mindfulness and through the narrative work. But I know you do a lot of work in the educational setting. So tell us a bit about the work that you do in the classroom and how you've seen this particular framework have an impact with younger people.
Sure. Well, research has shown us that one of the number one identifiers of a student's success in the classroom is the relationship with the teacher. And although people mightn't always like it, if a student doesn't like their teacher, if they don't have a connection, the learning is not going to happen effectively. So one of the main things that I work on when I'm working with teachers is, how can teachers build a professional, friendly relationship? Because you want to build a relationship, you want to show, as a teacher, you want to show vulnerability, but you also have to show that you're professional. So how can you show that you're a real person and yet also maintain that wise persona? So when a teacher understands their strengths and understands the strengths of their students, it's a lot easier to be vulnerable, because it can be in an objective space. That's where the narrative comes in, because you can understand it as part of the story. When I work with students in particular, it's about helping them tap into their emotions and have an emotional vocabulary. Because the bigger a person's emotional vocabulary, the more they can check in with themselves, understand what they're thinking and feeling, and then express it. When they can do that in relation to their strengths, so they can see the pattern where, because generally what happens is that we have a thought. The thought manifests as an emotion, that manifests as a behaviour. So when students see the general pattern that their strengths follow, we can talk about it in an objective way. Okay, so if you have high adaptability, this is a process that you will generally follow. Does that sound right? And it does, but it puts it into a language. And because it puts it into a language, it's so much easier for the student to understand. So as a practical example, I was working with a couple of sisters, and we were working on study skills. And they were sisters and in the same household, and yet had vastly different study styles. And what can sometimes happen is that when you do something differently to somebody else, even a sibling, is that you start to feel almost defensive that, well, if you're doing it that way, then maybe I'm doing it wrong. So I'm going to be strong and argue against you, say you're doing it wrong because I want to protect my way of doing it. So when I worked with these two sisters, what we figured out was one sister high in adaptability, other sister high in achiever. Of course, they're going to have two different ways. Achiever sister wants to get started early and wants to get working on it and make sure she gets everything done. Adaptability sister will do it all last minute. And even then, for mum, it's hard to understand when you've got two daughters studying the same way, which is different to the way you studied. So what we do is work with all three and find a study pattern that actually works in line with the student's strengths so that they feel comfortable, and help mum and dad understand that this is the study pattern that will work for this student. So so that's what happens, I guess, when I work with students. Another example, worked with a mother who had harmony and communication. Daughter has deliberative and competition. Daughter had to come first. If daughter didn't come first, she'd come home very upset. Mum would say, that's okay, everyone has to have a chance to win, let's talk about it. Daughter would storm off, you don't understand. So this daughter was also suffering from a lot of anxiety because of the high expectations she'd set herself. So the reason mum got me in was for mindfulness. So what I do is, depending on which, people can come and see me because they want mindfulness, they can come and see me because they want strengths, or they can come and see me because they want narrative. Whichever road we take, we always come to the same spot. So we did the mindfulness techniques with this particular mother and daughter. We then looked at their strengths, and we came up with a strategy that would work. So mum realised she needed to say, when daughter comes in upset because she didn't come first in an exam, I understand that must be really frustrating to not come first. What is it that you can do next time to come first? Why don't you have a think about it? We can talk about it later. And so then daughter can go off and use a deliberative. So it's just simple little things like that.
Yeah, I think those are great examples, and while it sounds very simple when you explain it, but there's a lot of work in the background that needs to be done, isn't there, from all three parties and even, the individuals that you're talking about there. So sounds like, in a day where our millennials and even those generations, those early student generations, are dealing with so much angst, as you just referenced, that this could be a really great framework and tool for them to cope and build resilience and just be aware of their own motivations. Do you see this serving a purpose in that capacity?
Oh, look, definitely. Even years ago when I was in the classroom and I was using a version of strengths, positive psychology, I guess. So it wasn't even nearly as effective as what I do currently. I'd have the main thing, students would come back, or their parents would come back and say, we really appreciated the way you broke things down. So what Strength Finder allows us to do, when we take these three areas, so when you look at narrative, you break things down into the component parts of a story. When you look at Strength Finder, you break things down into these thoughts, emotions, behaviours, needs and contributions. And by breaking it down and making it simple, making sure you've got awareness because you're using your mindfulness skills, what you can then do is reformulate the puzzle so that it works for the individual. So that's the mechanism that I use when I'm working with people. When I do a workshop, I actually teach teachers how to do it. So when I'm coaching, I run people through the process, but when I run workshops, I teach people how to break things down, how to actually look at their talents, how to look at the structure of narrative, how to look at what they gain out of mindfulness and blend it all together so that they can reach an outcome. I believe very strongly in the idea of teach a man to fish rather than give them fish. Mm-hmm. So I guess an example here, I was working with a school here in Queensland. First of all, I did a workshop with the teachers, teaching them these principles. Then did a seminar with the students, introducing them to Strength Finder, so they were very excited to do their assessment. So to CliftonStrengths students. Then they did their CliftonStrengths students assessment straight away. Then what I did is went in each term and worked with the teachers. The teachers then would use the activities I gave them, modified a bit for their individual students with the students. So it was this, because teachers are with students all the time, when you work with teachers, they can then help work with students. So what that does, as we have, or I believe anyway, as we have more and more students leave the classroom and go on to university or go on to the workforce, understanding their talents, understanding what it is they do well, then they will go into the workforce with a vocabulary that they can clearly express what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and understand what others are thinking and feeling. Because I think one of the things that people mightn't always be consciously aware of is the relationship between communication, or the connection, I should say, between communication and relationships. Relationships are everything. And in order to have effective relationships, you need effective communication.
Yeah, and therefore you need a language to put around that to be able to clearly articulate what it is that you're feeling. And I know a lot of students struggle with the maturity of being able to really express that. And so I can see this playing a huge role in giving them the tools to be able to express that and say, why am I feeling this way? And what I'm noticing in you that's making me feel this way, that kind of thing.
That's right. Because look, oh, sorry, Jim.
Yeah, let me jump in on that, because I think that Nicole, you work in this space, and Claire, you alluded to it. This generation seems to be anxious, right? It just seems to struggle with kind of this nervousness, this view of the future, like no generation I've ever seen before. Nicole, do you have any, since you're working with them all the time, do you have any insight as to why? What do you think? I don't think any one person can know why, right? But what's your take on that? Because I think that's important as coaches coaching or teachers teaching in this space, that we kind of understand that. As my daughter, who is 19, is in the middle of all of this, and I'm kind of grappling with it. I as a dad, I had 4 boys who didn't necessarily struggle as much, and she's having all these issues. Can you give us some clues, Nicole, what you're seeing out there?
Oh yeah, Jim, this is a pet area of mine, and I think there's a number of contributions. One of the things is, as parents, and not all parents, but generally students or kids have been so much more sheltered as children than what they were, for example, than when I was growing up. I grew up, I'd go off on my horse, I'd be 12, go out riding. Mum and Dad had no clue where I was, absolutely no clue, and then I'd come home. And yet today, I mean, you'd almost be accused of being a negligent parent if you didn't know where your child, 12-year-old, was at every moment. So children have grown up very sheltered, very protected. So that's part of it. So that when they then reach into areas where that things are a bit scary, they go back into a fear mode, because their parents have almost inbuilt a fear mode, as in, well, if you go out on your own, something bad's going to happen to you. So there's a paradox or a battle happening inside them between, I am at the age that my body and my whole self is telling me to go out and experiment, but I've been taught that if I go out and experiment, or if I go out on my own, something will go wrong. So that's one part. The other part is the whole idea of always being on in terms of technology. We see everything immediately, straight away, and we're automatically judged by our peers and by society. Society is telling us how to act, how to behave, what to think, how to feel. And unless we've developed a strong enough sense of self, it's really difficult to hold that in, to hold strong with who we are. And so I think that the impact of an always-on society and the impact of always being sheltered, and the other part is it's really competitive. The media, whether it's right or wrong, lets students know all the time, if you don't get into uni, if you don't get this mark, if you don't do this well, if you're not studious, you're not going to get a good job, and if you don't get a good job, you're going to fail. So I think that's the third part of the triangle.
Yeah, I think you make a super good point there, in that we have put so much pressure on the university system, and for every student to go. And the university system was never intended for that. It was really, it's kind of a percentage basis. And yet you said it, you hit it right on the head when you said, if you don't go, you're going to fail, right? You can't get a good job. I've heard this from parents. So if you don't go to college, you won't get a good job. And these kids go to school and there's so much pressure, and many of them, the university's not right for them. But there's nobody there to coach them along, right? There's nobody there to help them make that transition, or to say, here in the United States, there's a huge movement to get students working in the labor areas of skilled labor, right? Welding, building, construction, plumbing, some of those kinds of things. By the way, we still need those things in a modern world, right? But there isn't a great system now, although I hear what you're building, but there's still not a great system of coaching. We have all kinds of systems to get the kids into college and get perfect SAT or ACT scores here in the United States. I don't know what you guys use. And then we got all those systems in place. But if you drop out of that one of those systems, if you don't make it, yeah, you're right. There's an incredible amount of fear that these students like, what do I do now? I don't have any. You don't have anywhere to go. So anyways, I appreciate you thinking through that with me. That's, I think, a good exercise to kind of think through that. I'm really jealous of the wind that is blowing in your.
It's good. It's keeping it cool. If it wasn't blowing, I'd be really hot. You'd see me sweating everywhere.
So interesting. I think even a more reason as we think through these areas of coaching, I think it's really important that we not just have all these avenues for students to get the perfect scores and the right school, and man, that's like getting the odds of that are like getting into the NBA here in the United States. It's very, very small. Very few students are going to do that. And I'd love to see a movement of coaching and internships and mentoring programs that come along with this. I'm sure in your work, not just coaching, but does mentoring come along with that, or are you seeing some power in mentoring?
Definitely, Jim. That's and I'm so glad you brought it up. That's what I see as one of the core areas. I work with Griffith University here in Queensland as a mentor. I've worked in schools very much as a mentor. There's lots of great mentoring programs, and I think we need a very strong mentorship program that will allow students to move into the workforce, experience the workforce, but have that wise guide. So if you think in terms of the hero journey, there's that wise guide, and what the wise guide is a mentor. So that mentorship role is vital in our own journeys of life, because when you think about it, we are following a hero's journey. So that wise guide is really important, but those wise guides need training. So what we need to be working, and I know I'm spinning back around again, but we need to be working with the teachers in the universities in their teacher courses. We need to be working with businesses in terms of what makes an effective mentor, so that they learn, so that anyone who is working with students understands how to work with students effectively and how to give them the skill set where they know who they are. So it's about self-awareness and others' awareness.
Nicole, have you found in your work with students, I see this when I go in and I speak at schools on behalf of Gallup for technology jobs, some of the students have kind of given up. They have gotten into this spot where it's just so hard, and they're in high school and they already feel like they've failed. Are you able to work with those kinds of students, and what are you doing to be able to pull them, kind of pull them up out of the doldrums, so to speak?
Yep. They're the students I love working with most, particularly the boys that are at 16, 17, really confused about what they're doing. So I use story. Whatever story is a blockbuster at the moment, whatever story. So one of the first questions I always ask students are, what stories, what do you like to watch? What movies do you like to see? And then what I can do is come back and you bring back to plot structure or back to hero's journey structure and look at the structure of the story, and then overlay the idea of talent. And so even if someone hasn't done something like StrengthsFinder, you can overlay the natural patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. Because it's all happening in the screen in front of them, it's safe. And then it's just gradually using affirming words and a positive vocabulary. And by positive, I mean a vocabulary that adds on, not just one that's happy and sunny all the time, but using a proactive, that's a better word, using a proactive vocabulary, you actually help them feel within themselves what works. I worked with students here on the Gold Coast. They're from a completely disadvantaged situation. They've been thrown out of all sorts of schools, completely disengaged from the school system, and they're part of a program that they don't have set classrooms. They get picked up in the morning, we'd be in parks and then in different centres to teach numeracy and literacy. And so working with those particular students, it's all about helping them understand those feelings of thought and emotion when they can actually recognise them, have a language for them, which is where Strength Finder really comes in, or Strengths really, the CliftonStrengths really comes in, and then use it. So it's just that understanding self so you can understand others.
Claire, sorry to jump in there and take over.
No, I love it.
For that.
No, it was all very relevant. Great questions. Nicole, you've done a lot of work both in the educational setting and outside of it. Tell us about some of the stories where you've really seen an impact. I know you've talked about a few of them, but where would this have the biggest impact?
Yep. So where it's had an impact is working with a team. So sometimes what happens, obviously, is you're working with a team where you've got a whole lot of different sets of relationships. And believe me, I've worked with adult teams and it's just like working in the classroom. People can think it's different, but really it's not, because the relationships and the rivalries and the interplay of the classroom happens in a boardroom or in a wider situation. So what you can have is say one member of a team who's got something like restorative and deliberative, and then you might have another member of the team who's got something like positivity and communication. So positivity and communication, if positivity likes things to be upbeat and likes to recognise what's working. If something's not working, they might recognise it and be upset about it, but then they'll talk about it because they've got communication. But someone with, hang on, sorry, I'm just thinking about a particular example. Someone with restorative will recognise the problem and they might point it out. Someone with positivity isn't always going to like it and they'll talk about it. Now, the deliberative person, so there's a particular example, there was a conflict between my deliberative restorative and my positivity communication, because positive communication would recognise something, would feel down and talk about it so that they could get it off their chest. They needed to get it off their chest. But the restorative and deliberative didn't quite understand that, and it was causing friction in the office. So what we had to do is work with the positivity person and help them understand when and where it was okay to communicate, so that it didn't bring down the tone of the whole group, so that they could, so that instead of bringing down the tone of the group, they actually brought it up. So it's about, really what that sort of example is showing us is being aware of language, being aware of your language patterns, being aware of the impact on somebody else. So someone who's high in positivity needs to understand they'll feel that euphoric or that high rush, but they will also feel that low rush. Can you identify the emotion that's helping you happy? Can you give it a name? Can you also identify the emotion that's not feeling so good? Is it frustration? Is it disappointment? Is it dismay? Is it, put a word on it, then look at the thought that gives it to you, then you've got something that you can work with. And so sometimes with emotions, what people do is they automatically act on emotion, but they're acting on the raw emotion rather than thinking through the thought that's behind it. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's sort of the work that I tend to do very much with groups, is helping them understand and vocalize what they're thinking and feeling.
Yeah, and I can see that having so many applications, and given some of what we've talked about today for students in particular, and the important role that teachers play in the success of every single student in their life, in their classroom. And our research, by the way, of outcomes off the back of university shows exactly the same thing. Our student poll in Australia that we conduct every year shows that the number one indicator of high well-being and high hope and higher academic outcomes is I have a teacher that cares about me as a person. So it all adds up. I think we all see the role of that. Sounds like there's a lot of work to do. So where do you start? Do you start with the teachers? Do you start with the students? I mean, how do you really get this movement going? Where would you say we need to start?
Yeah, as I was saying before, I really do think we need to start with the teachers. Where I think we need to start is actually in the teacher training schools. At university, in the university courses. I was talking to a new scheme teacher late last year, and talking about what I did. And he was saying, Nick, we don't learn any of this in class. So what happens often in the universities is that you're taught, as a teacher, you're taught classroom management, which is really teaching classroom discipline. And there's a number of different strategies that you have for working with a class, which doesn't work if you're a casual teacher, because you can't, because building the relationships, you don't have the same opportunity because you're not with the teacher all the time. And that's what a lot of our teachers do. They go in, first of all, as casual teachers, and they can get burnt out almost before they start, or they start and they're trying to do so many different things that they get burnt out. However, if in the teacher training, when you're at university, you are taught things like CliftonStrengths students, or if you're taught StrengthsFinder, if you're taught how to understand those patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior, if you're taught those mindfulness techniques, if you're taught how to build a relationship, then you've got a much bigger chance of building the relationships quickly. I know it works because I do it as a casual teacher. I can be in a classroom, strengths spot, pick my high communicators, pick my people who might have more of a restorative or more of a especially competition, pick my high adaptability, and then use particular phrases with those kids, get the maiden kids back on side, and then it all works. It's exactly the same working with adults. I could go into it. I mean, I know when I've, if I'm working with a particular group, I've generally got their StrengthsFinder results, but if I'm giving a workshop that's just introducing StrengthsFinder, then you can pick the people in the audience the same way. And that's how you start to manage not only relationships with the people at work that you know their strengths, but you start to manage all your relationships in all areas of life, because you've got a way of understanding others. And I know I'm right off track again there. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely.
Nicole,
Go ahead, Jim.
Carol Ann in the chat room was asking, do you get a chance to work with the parents as well in what you do?
Oh, yes, definitely. And that's a good question. It's what I actually found is that if I'm working one-on-one with a student, if I'm doing a coaching program, I always include the parent. So the very first, session is parent and child together, and I do both the parent's strengths. I have the parent's strengths there. I get the parent to do the strength finder as well. I've got the student's strengths. And then although I'm going through the strengths of the student, I then tie in where the parents come in, because I did a couple where I only did the student and it wasn't nearly as effective as when I had done both. So I'd say it's essential, absolutely essential to work parent and student.
And school-wide, do you get the opportunity to do it? I mean, that wouldn't almost be scalable, but how does that work for you?
Do you mean school-wide with parents? Or
do you get how much access and who gets access and how does that work?
So the main school that I've worked with up here, what we did, we went through working with the students and the teachers, and then we had an additional, like an evening where the parents were all invited to come in, and we went through the whole system with the parents, and it was just a very quick, maybe 20-minute introduction to the whole strengths idea, and then we had questions. And that was where the parents were able, they almost came, as a teacher, you might, you go to different parent-teacher mixes, and you know that parents come with their list of teachers. I've got to talk to these teachers about what it is. On this particular occasion, parents came with their list of their children's strengths. Now, my child's got this. Can you tell me about it? It was very funny. And in that particular school, who really have embraced it, it's working very, very well. And it is that in a school situation, it's always how much you're involving the parents. If you've got the parents on board, talking with the teachers, talking with the students, you've got this holistic environment that works very effectively. So when I get the opportunity, that's the best.
So how does one just doesn't walk into a school and say, hey, everybody, like I got the strength stuff and you should just do it. So what's after working in schools for a while, you probably get this hang of it. But how did that conversation start? If we've got coaches listening, we're like, man, I would love to be able to do something like that. What's the very first step or steps to get that started? Because they're always smaller than you think, right? Those first steps are always smaller.
It's a good question. Oh, yeah. Look, for me, being a classroom teacher, what I've been able to do is work off the back of the fact that I'm a classroom teacher. So as a casual teacher, it's also one of the reasons I stay casual teacher, I'm able to go in and talk to lots of different teachers in different schools, and just sitting around in the staff room at lunchtime, sitting around and talking about strengths, or sitting around and a particular topic may come up, and then I can talk about how a strengths approach, or talk in terms of a positive psychology approach, and people think, oh, wow, that's really fascinating, I'd like to know more. I'm also a member of a number of different teaching groups on Facebook and LinkedIn, and we have different discussions. And look, I admit completely, my sales style is completely relational. I don't have, my first influencing strength is woo. It comes in at about 15. So the way I influence is by building relationships. So for myself, it's all been communications, I'd say, in the classroom, or talking with parents, like friends who've got kids similar ages, and talking with parents who, a parent will say, oh, you know, my child is doing the HSC, they're so stressed out, they don't know what to do. I'll offer a strategy, and then if they like that strategy, they'll then communicate further in contact with me. I also have, my courses are accredited through, here in Australia, we have the Australian Teaching Standards. I've got workshops which are accredited through the New South Wales accrediting body, and that's up as a, teachers can access professional development through there. So that's what I do. But again, I'd say it's all about building relationships.
Did you necessarily start with this end in mind when you were 10 years ago, when you were kind of maybe thinking of this journey? Are you exactly where you thought you would be, or has it taken you different places because you went with the flow?
I'm actually exactly it. Financially, no. So, or from a, I would have hoped to have run more courses and been bigger in terms of my reach by now. But from a positional, so it's been slower, I guess, than I would have liked. But if you were to pick up my book, written, as I said, I published it in 2012. So what's that? We're now 7, 8. Oh, my maths is terrible. 12, 13, 14, 15. 5 years ago. 5 years ago.
We did really change years. So that's
okay. Right. That's right. So if you were to pick up my book, you would see, because I've basically written in the book what my journey was, what I wanted to create, and that's what I've created. The main difference is discovering Strength Finder. So one of my big plans for this year is to rewrite the book and have the CliftonStrengths flowing through it in a lot more definite way. Because when I initially wrote it, strengths was a small part, or positive psychology was a small part. Since discovering such a robust tool, it's become a big part. It's got a part that's as big as the narrative and the mindfulness. So, but yeah, it's a great question. I'm determined to make a difference in the lives of teenagers in Australia and the world. But it's not just because I want to make a difference with teenagers. It's because I can see that for the world to be the place that the potential that it's got, if we work with teenagers, if we help them understand while they're young, then they can go into positions of power and be empowered and be proactive rather than reactive. Too much business is reactive rather than being proactive. So it's my way of trying to help the world.
I love it.
I do like, Claire, let me interrupt one more time and then I'll let you have it back. But let me just say this. I do like the approach of reaching a few, because you never know what kind of impact that's going to have. And I think sometimes we think it has to be big and gigantic, and it has to be hundreds or thousands. And it can really be 2 or 3 or 1 who has a huge impact in the future. So as coaches, I would not necessarily lament if you're coaching a few, because you could be reaching many, many more. So Claire, I'll shut up and hand it back to you.
Nice. No, I think that was very powerful what you said, Jim. And I was only going to say, the amount of people that say to us, strengths has changed my life, finding out my own strengths and living my strengths has transformed the way that I live. And if only we could get to people earlier. So at that teenage time where it's such a formative time of their lives. You're choosing what to do next and who you're going to be in the big bad world. And so I love your mission, and I love that you just can very clearly articulate that, and that you had that vision all the way back then when you first published the book. So love that you're going to write it again. If anyone wanted to find the book now or find your website, this is your opportunity to share with us how we could do that.
Okay, so the book is available on Amazon. So I think I've got, yeah, there we go. It's this is a sample copy. It's just called Is This My Story? And if you just Google it on Amazon, it's available as an ebook, or you can actually buy it as a complete hard copy book. I will give the caveat that it was written 5 years ago, and I have since, a lot of my work has gone on so much from there, and it is written for young adults more than for adults, but there will be another version coming out. And my website is, again, Is This My Story, which is just www.isthismystory.com. And everything, basically a lot of the work that I've been talking about today is all on there, and a larger description of what it means to be living a mindful, strength-based narrative. So the structure is on there if people are interested, in all sorts of resources. I've got input number 5. So when people... So there is a lot of words on my website. Been blogging for about 5 or 6 years now, so there's a lot of words on there, a lot of content. So I have to give that as a caveat warning, but it's so good knowing that even when I do a workshop, I let people know. Learner, intellection, input, at 3, 4, and 5. I will give you a lot of information, but I give it to you in a printed document. I will talk to it, just take in what you need. And that has made a huge difference too with my teaching, because I used to overload people and I wasn't even aware that I was overloading. So I think that's an important thing for teachers to know. I worked just before Christmas. I was working with a particular group of teachers, and one of them afterwards sent me an email and said she'd shown some of the work to her husband when she went home, and he said it was like I had a soul reader. So I hadn't quite heard CliftonStrengths described that way before, but that's how deeply we were able to get into the nitty-gritty of some of the challenges this particular teacher had been having. And it's not just getting to the nitty-gritty of the challenges, because it's segmented, because you divide up where the challenges are, then you've got a deliberate and an exact place to fix. And that's the benefit of working with the 3 modalities together, is that it's not just about knowing who you are. It's not just about identifying what could work better. It's identifying how, what strategies, what tools, what ways of communicating. Who do you need to communicate with? It maps it all out for you.
Love it. I love the framework. And Nicole, apart from the work that you do with teenagers and in the educational setting, what other work could others come to you for? What else do you do?
So obviously working with parents and teenagers, it's also about working with families, and particularly working with couples. As we said before, communication is a big thing. So my partner and I, we both work with couples. Actually, this year we're planning on offering a few retreats. So if people want to come up to the Gold Coast and work on a relationship for a weekend, yes, Jim would love to have you.
Got your first client.
I'll volunteer.
That's right. So we'll be offering a few retreats just for single couples, but also planning on offering some for groups. Come up to the Gold Coast, doing some writing and narrative and meditation, as well as understanding strengths, going up, visiting Byron and the Crystal Palace up here. And so there's some interesting things happening there, very much from a relationship and communication space.
Very nice. Thank you. Jim, any questions from your end?
Just one final question from Carol Ann out in the chat room. She asked, are you working primarily with students 14 or below, high school, both?
Great question. I work primarily with high school, so primarily with students who are in year 10, 11 and 12. What I've found is that that's the age group, and it's really students at the end of year 10, so they're at that sort of 16, 17 age group, that are then going into senior study, who really need a way of managing their emotions so that they don't get too anxious during the tribulations and the high emotional roller coaster that happens in those final 2 years of school, and to really give them a solid framework, to give them a solid basis on which to work so that they can organise their time, organise their emotions, organise their thoughts, and feel confident when they go into that final exam. I only work with the younger students if they're generally when they're part of a family. I'm working with the teenager and working with younger siblings. So I've done a bit with younger, but not as much.
All right, Claire, I think that we can bring this in for a landing. Why don't you take a second and thank Nicole for coming?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nick. And I think it's been really a great discussion. I love the framework, and people can go onto your website, Is This My Story, to have a look at all of those incredible resources that you've been collecting and blogging over the years. Thank you so much for your generosity. As I said at the beginning of the session, you're a really active and generous member of the Strengths community. I love that you have so much to share and really, loving seeing your activity online. So thank you for your generosity in sharing your frameworks and your approach and your plans for your business with us here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Claire. And thank you so much, Jim, for giving me the opportunity. It's just, as you could probably recognise, I am just so passionate about this. All I want is for our kids and our young adults to have the best possible opportunity they have to live the life that they want to live. And I'm just so grateful not for the opportunity to speak about it, and for a tool like CliftonStrengths, which just makes it identifiable. So thank you.
Well, Nicole, we appreciate it, and thanks for coming on here. A great story, great way to kick off 2018 for the next series. We are in season 6 of Called to Coach, which is just crazy for me to think about. We've been doing this 6 years now, but appreciate you coming on and sharing those stories. I think there's opportunities in this area. They're endless, and they all start when you get engaged. Nicole asked you that question, like, you have to start big, and no, you can start small, and you can just start with your local school. Or with some kids that you can mentor. So again, thanks for coming on. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center. Just gallupstrengthscenter.com. Send us your questions or comments if you'd like to be guest blogger. We are taking guest blog submissions throughout 2018. We'd love to have that. If you got 400-600 words or story to share, Nicole, there's a clue for you. You can send that to us, coaching@gallup.com. Put guest blogger in the subject line, and that's a great way. That will get to Micah when she gets back. We've got some folks approving those while she's gone. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program, as well as all the past ones are available on the links are available on our social resources page at the Gallup Strengths Center and at our coaches blog. Just go to coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup-Certified Strengths Coach, you can see a list of all the courses that lead up to that on our courses page. Courses.gallup.com. Claire, is there anything coming up you want to emphasize out of the Australia office?
We do. We've got the Accelerated Strengths Coach course happening in March. So if you're interested in attending that one and become a Gallup-Certified Strengths Coach, then you just need to get in touch with us. That's on courses.gallup.com page for the dates and all of the details around that course.
If you can't get to that site for whatever reason, there's a contact form right there on our live page. Apparently, this statement was way more popular than I thought it was going to be, but join us on our Facebook page by searching Gallup Webcasts. I ask on that page how you found us, and many of you over the last couple of weeks, I just started saying this on our webcast, said you found it through the webcast. So we appreciate you, one, making it all the way to the end of the podcast. It's amazing. You stayed on here for 45 or 50 minutes. But join us on our Facebook group. Just search Gallup Webcasts. We'd love to have you out there. If you found this helpful, we'd ask that you'd share it. And thank everyone for joining us. And we look forward to the next Call to Coach. And that will say goodbye, everybody.